start the stream. Great. Well, welcome everyone to the inaugural 2023 meeting of the Land Use and Ethics Subcommittee. I'd like to issue a sincere congratulations to all of my colleagues for being assigned to the best subcommittee on the best committee in the best state legislative body in the country. So it's quite an honor, I'm sure, for all of you. So just a couple of quick ground rules before we jump in. Certainly, as we go through the session, if there are any concerns you'll have with any bills or you want to put in any amendments in, please just let me know. For the advocates, please let me know if you'd like someone to be invited for either one of your bills or one of our colleagues' bills to come sit in on the virtual meeting. The general rule is that we'll send them a link if they have some sort of interest in the bill, but that they won't turn their camera off unless they are called on by a member of the General Assembly. And it looks like everyone is on that same page and dutifully complying already this afternoon. So we're going to take up three bills today, HB 23, HB 32, and HB 60. We're going to start with HB 32 from Delegate Charkoudian. Kristen, do you want to walk us through and remind us about what this bill does?
Sure. Hi. And for those who don't know me, I'm Kristen. So this is the Maryland Food System Resiliency Council, which was established in statute in 2021. And so what this bill does is it formally places the council within the Office of Resilience in the Maryland Department of Emergency Management. It's not altering duties or anything like that.
Yes. Okay, great. So yeah, so this was a bill, if y'all remember that those of us that were here, we passed this bill on sort of a temporary basis in the 2021 session to set up this council. They issued a report recently with a series of recommendations. And so I think the position from the bill sponsor is that in order to make good on all those recommendations, that this needs to be a permanently housed council. Now, I would like to offer the opportunity for MDEM or for anyone who's on the call that's been working on this bill to just chime in about the existence of any amendments or any other context that we're leaving out if they're here. Yeah, Ms. Sierra, what did I mess up?
Sir, you did not mess up anything to our knowledge. We have not put in any amendments. We are on the record as supporting the bill as written.
Okay. Great. Well, so just an FYI for everyone now that I think we have almost all the subcommittee here. We're not going to be taking any votes today. We've got the three bills, but for our introductory meeting today, it's just going to be sort of walking through the amendments and reminding everyone what the bills do. But we're not going to take any votes until next week. Our Valentine's Day meeting will be our first voting session, but this is just purely a work session. So if we get any amendments on this bill, we can take them up next week. But I was going to say, does anyone have any questions about it? And it looks like we do have one from the illustrious Delegate Holmes. Who may be frozen. We'll give Delegate Holmes a minute to come back to us. In the meantime, Delegate Naraki.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate it. We had a question from our colleague from the Eastern Shore, Delegate Jacobs, about including the seafood industry in this bill. Just wanted to kind of gauge the appetite, so to speak, of that amendment that he had spoken about.
Yeah, I mean, that seems fine to me personally. I mean, I do think probably, I think the hesitation always about work groups is once you start adding one group, how many other groups are going to line up to be added. Ms. Sierra, do you all have a position on that? I don't know if you remember that part of the hearing or not.
Yes, thank you so much. So we do have some concern, not directly about adding somebody from the seafood industry, but as Delegate Vaughn mentioned, really the broader concept of adding several different groups. So the Senate side has also had several groups approach them about amending. And so once we kind of open the floodgates, we're concerned that this council, which already has 34 people on it, will become somewhat unwieldy. I do also want to highlight that the secretary currently has the capability of adding anyone to the council as members should that expertise or area be warranted. The council also has had very robust public participation. The subcommittees that the group has set up have anywhere between 50 and 30 people in and of themselves, and they offer and integrate public comment directly with the work that they do. So there's really a lot of opportunity to participate, even if they're non-voting members. The council is currently in the process of working on bylaws, which will better kind of lay out how new members would be appointed. Even though the secretary has a statutory authority, he really wants to make sure that the council is comfortable with new people being added. And so we respectfully request that the bill as written be passed out of committee and that no additional entities be added to allow the council to be able to govern that portion of their additions directly.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. And yeah, Delegate Naraki, I mean, obviously that's an amendment that we could consider and talk about as a subcommittee and talk about the pros and cons. And so if you wanted to put that in, or if Delegate Jacobs or someone else wanted to put that in, as long as we get it in before next Tuesday's meeting, we could discuss it and take a vote on that amendment. And then I would like to go ahead and take a vote on this bill next week, if we could.
Okay, Mr. Chair, I'll talk to Delegate Jacobs today in committee and just kind of see if he wants to do it, or
Okay.
I'm not sure that I'm going to, but if he wants to, I'll entertain that for him.
Okay, awesome. And Delegate Holmes, we'll go back to you. I know that you're the least nervous person in the body, but I think that your computer froze up at the moment that I called on you before. So let's see if it'll cooperate this time.
Yeah. And the only reason why I raised my hand is because I am having a definite internet connection problem. I don't know what the issue is. Obviously, I'm in the building with everyone else, but I guess because I'm here on the West Wing, things aren't connecting properly. So I'm hearing things in and out. I just wanted to mention it. That's all.
Okay, yeah. So we're not going to vote on anything today, Delegate Holmes. So if you miss anything, we can talk offline about anything you miss. But maybe if you could try leaving, and I promise we'll let you back in if you leave, or if you just get disconnected involuntarily. Okay. So does anyone else have any question or feedback on House Bill 32? Okay, so we're going to move on to its sort of reverse twin, House Bill 23, which has a big sponsor problem. But other than that, it looks like a pretty good bill. Let's see, can we bring that one up? Okay. So this bill, to remind everyone, is about mobile homes. And as it came in, essentially the idea was to make it easier for residents of mobile home communities. These are people who own their homes, but who lease the land underneath it. Make it a little bit easier for them in the event of a sale to band together to collectively purchase the property. We have essentially, my office has been talking in depth with a variety of stakeholders, many of whom are on the call with us this afternoon. We have a set of amendments that should be here and on your floor system that I think we can just briefly walk through, or more robustly walk through, depending on the views of the subcommittee. But first, we'll take a question from Delegate Lehman.
Delegate Stewart, Mr. Chairman, can I ask a question?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah. Okay, so I had a pretty lengthy discussion with the group. I don't know who they are. I guess they represent one of these, they were lobbyists, Mr. Castelli. And you did indicate to me you had worked with them on some pretty extensive amendments. The only one I was a little surprised by was the one that talks about the ability of a purchaser to raise the lot rent. And I think it's limited to 10% a year. That seems kind of high to me. I'm just curious why you didn't push for like maybe the the consumer price index or inflation or something that would potentially be lower than that.
Yeah, well, it's a great question. I'm going to turn it over momentarily to the groups that you're talking about. Just to briefly answer your question, I'm sure they may weigh in as well. Delegate Lehman, you know me, I'm obviously going to always fight for the lowest rent increase we can possibly get.
I know.
But just to clarify for what we're talking about here is in the set of amendments, we're essentially creating triggers to allow before we allow a more robust process for community members to collectively band together to put an offer up. So basically there are triggers before those more robust protections come in. And the trigger is basically when the purchaser of one of these communities is what I would say, frankly, would be a bad actor. And that's if the bad actor is not willing to keep the community as an affordable housing community. If they're planning to change the use of it and kick everyone out, then that's one of the triggers that allow more robust community participation. The second one is this rent provision that basically says if a purchaser is not willing to commit to not jacking up the rent 10% or more, then that also triggers these more robust provisions. So we'll go into more detail on that. First, before I call on the advocates, does that answer your question for now, Delegate Lehman? I promise we'll discuss it more about how we landed on that number. But I want to turn it over to the council. And I also just mentioned you heard from Kristen, who's fantastic. We're going to hear from Matt, who is fantastic. And we're also going to eventually hear from Patrick, who's fantastic. One of the great things about this subcommittee is that we're the only subcommittee in this committee and maybe in the whole House of Delegates that has all three committee council working for it. And that's one of the main reasons we keep it rolling and humming here. And Matt is a big part of that, and Kristen's a big part of that. And Matt, please tell me if I've messed anything up already, or if you want to sort of briefly go over anything else.
No, Delegate, no mistakes or anything. I'm not seeing the amendment that was being discussed, and I didn't see it on the floor system. So
okay,
I guess was this something that might have been sent out with the meeting materials? Because I've only reviewed the bill in terms of the bill as it's
got it. So yeah, Colleen, if you can pull up the amendments, I think probably we'll walk through them today. We'll make sure that y'all get them one way or another, either via email or via floor system before next week's, but we will talk about them now. And so with that, if I could call on Camille Fesh, who represents one of these communities, to talk through the amendments, because a lot of them originated with them and then we tweaked them. So yeah, Camille, if you want to take it away.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Subcommittee Chair. Could I also bring up Ryan Hotchkiss, my client? He can help provide a lot more in-depth.
Please do. And yeah, if you don't feel that you have to go line by line, we can do that eventually. But if you want to start with just sort of the thrust of the amendments and our conversations and the intent here.
Sure. Very briefly, Horizon Land Company, the CEO and founder Ryan Hotchkiss, owns a number of manufactured housing communities throughout the state of Maryland and on 20 other states. So our goal here is for consumer protection, to protect the people who live in these communities and to make sure these communities have the ability to remain as a communities and aren't converted. And also to make sure that we keep, as you stated, bad actors out, entities that come in and want to jack up the rent, or entities that come in and want to convert the land use. We want to make sure that we preserve this, what I think one of the only or the only form of affordable housing that is not subsidized. So with that, turning to the amendments very briefly, the thrust of the amendments is to make sure that whenever a property is sold, that the residents, pursuant to certain triggers, would have an extra time to present, if they want to, an offer to purchase the land and become a resident-owned community. To be clear, residents could band together at any time and present an offer of purchase at any time. So this is not something that is prohibited currently. It is something that that this bill gives the residents extra time to do so. Would you like me to go through the specific amendments, Mr. Chair?
Sure, that would be helpful.
Okay. So the first amendment,
and Colleen can maybe try to follow along and scrolling if people don't have a copy of this, you can kind of look at the shared screen.
Sure. And Ryan, if you want to jump in, please.
Yeah, just for a little bit of context, we had the opportunity to sit down with Delegate Stewart when this came out, and we had a great conversation. And ultimately, right, I said, what are we trying to accomplish with this bill? And the thrust of the bill was protection for the most amount of MH, manufactured housing residents, against particularly disenfranchisement if someone was to come down and redevelop the property, or against a bad actor. And I said, well, listen, we're all about preserving MH as affordable housing, and we hate bad actors. We don't like them in our state or any other state that we're in, because that reflects poorly on us and it leads to all sorts of legislation that we don't support. And so we would like to keep bad actors out of the state of Maryland. I said, I'll tell you what, why don't we legislate against bad actors and not just against, giving effectively what's effectively a wealth shift, taking land from private owners and giving it to a consortium of residents, which then effectively becomes a subsidized scenario. So in talking with that, I said, well, look, here's the deal. If in the state of New Jersey and the state of New York, there's a requirement that the mobile home park must remain a community for 5 years. I said, I'm all for that. And I said, also, to keep bad actors out, let's put a cap on the amount of rent somebody can go up so they don't jack the rent up. That's the big concern. We're not trying to fix rents. And I'll tell you, if we are trying to fix rents, I lose support for this bill. And we're going to bring in a whole bunch of other people that are anti any kind of rent fixing, and a whole bunch of other groups that are probably going to hurt, scuttle the chances of this bill passing. But what we wanted to do was put in a cap that kept bad actors out. I arrived at 10% because that's a fair amount. I mean, all you guys are from counties that are going to reassess this property the minute a new deed is recorded. Okay. And most counties aren't bashful about reassessments. Oftentimes when we acquire communities, there's significant deferred maintenance that needs to be fixed, new roads. We bought a park in Charles County called Idlewood, where we spent $1.3 million replacing the entire sewer distribution system. All right. We only increased rent about 5% the first couple of years that we owned it. And I don't think we've gone up more than 5% since then. All right. But that hurts. So the idea was to put a cap on this thing so that bad actors can't come in and raise rents 40, 50, 60%, like you're seeing in some states across the country. All right. The idea was also to give residents more protections in the event the community was going to be closed down. So we actually added some more robust language to the relocation statute to give residents more time and more money. Ultimately, what we're after here is consumer protection, not the distribution of wealth from private landowners to a group of MH residents. And on top of that, the proposals that we provided basically apply to every MH owner in the state. Okay, every MH owner is going to get the protections of knowing that their community will remain a community for 5 years. And let's be honest, no developer is buying a community for to run it for 5 years only to redevelop it after that. And they're going to have the assurance to know that for at least the next 3 years, certainly probably beyond that, because no one's same idea, rent's not going to be jacked up, and anybody coming in and buying their community is not somebody underwriting the deal based on a 30, 50, 80% rent increase. Right. And then if the incoming owner can't agree to those things, then the residents by all rights should have the opportunity to protect themselves. OK, but I don't know how many residents actually buy their communities, probably less than 10%, if even that much. This provides every resident in MH in the state of Maryland a protection rather than just those people who are able to buy their community. So the end of the day, after speaking with Delegate Vaughn, I'm sorry I'm going on, with Delegate Stewart, became very clear that we had a real opportunity to provide real consumer protections to residents, to give people a sense of stability in their communities, and to keep bad actors out of our state, at which point we proposed this particular solution. And quite honestly, it's one we're pretty tied to and not, we think it's extremely fair. And so, Camille, if you want to walk through the statute.
Yeah, very quickly. And the first one, this is the first statute, 8A-1201, is when a mobile home park will be changed, the land use will be changed. Excuse me, stumbling over my words. Currently, this would only apply to parks that are over 38 sites. We've lowered that to 10 to make sure it's more inclusive and that more of the homeowners in the parks are given protections. In addition, currently when a relocation occurs, the homeowner is given 10 months of rent paid for the 10 months immediately preceding. We're going to up that to 12 months to make sure it's a full year of immediately paid rent. So that keeps the current rent. So it's not a set amount, it's the amount that they've been paying. So it keeps up with inflation and with the CPI. So that's the First Amendment. The second one is that we want to make sure that a majority of the homeowners in the community agree to this. And it's not just one or two or a small minority of owners that will be binding all the community members to purchase. So and you'll see that it's 75 to 75%. So there's a homeowners association, which must comprise of at least 75% of the lots in the manufactured housing community. And then later on, when they voted, 75% of them, which means that gives us over 50%. I think it's technically 56%, but it gives us at least a majority of the homeowners that have affirmatively agreed to submit an offer of purchase to the current owner. All right, then the second is, so this 8B-402, the amendments in that are to make sure that this applies to an actual arm's length transaction, not if it's not if there's something where like a partial owner leaves the property, but it's not actually being sold, just sort of the ownership is being shifted around. And then in 8B-403, this is the crux of the bill, where the entity or the person acquiring the land would file an affidavit in the land records of the county, stating that they cannot change the land use. They'll keep the land use as a mobile home park, a manufactured housing community for 5 years following the date of acquisition. And that lot rent will not increase more than 10% per year for the first 3 years following acquisition. And as my client mentioned, this is something that will keep out bad actors that are looking to jack up rent and to turn a quick profit. But it does allow room for the new owner to take care of deferred maintenance, which can be extensive, and to deal with when the property is reassessed by the counties. But again, it's rent camp. You don't have to go up. It's just the maximum you can go up is 10%. And that's going to be very unappealing to somebody that does not want to continue with the park as a manufactured housing.
Yeah, and Camille, if I could just butt in there, just to crystallize this a little bit more for Delegate Lehman's point, that other subcommittee members may be concerned about. Obviously, anytime this is a sort of a broker compromise, these sets of amendments, I don't think that either Horizon or some of the consumer advocates that we work with in crafting this bill feel 100% great about every single amendment that's in here or that didn't make it in. I do know, for a fact that, for example, the Consumer Rights Coalition are now called the Economic Policy Action. Marceline is going to kill me for butchering the name, but, I think they in particular have some real trepidations about the 10% issue. And, the last thing they want to do is endorse the idea that a 10% rent increase is sort of something that we should be broadly supporting, right? But anytime you have a compromise, you're going to have situations where not everyone feels, 100% warm about the bill. That's the legislative process. But what I will note is that if you look at the history of these, especially bad actors, these venture capital companies, these hedge fund companies that are coming in other states and buying these properties, their rent increases are nowhere near 10%. They're much, much higher. I mean, you're talking about 60, 80, 300% increases. And so we're really hoping that 10%, while it seems high in kind of the context of like rental housing broadly, in this context, we're seeing such astronomical increases across the country that we're thinking that 10% really will do the same kind of work that a 6 or 7% will do, because the companies are really contemplating increases much, much higher than that. So that's the sort of the idea there. I just wanted to crystallize that. But yeah, sorry, Camille, feel free to keep going through it.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And the next thing is if the new proposed owner does not want to file this affidavit, then the current owner will submit a notice telling the residents will happen and giving them the opportunity to band together to purchase the property. And so we just add in a small provision that not only will we provide notice to all of the homeowners, but that it'll be posted in a public area, just to double check that there's one extra shot that every resident will have a chance to see the notices. And then the owner of the community will provide the price and the material terms and conditions of the offer to the homeowner association so that they can evaluate whether or not they'd like to make a substantially similar offer and present that number of days. In order to present that, they would have to, again, as I talked before, have a majority. So in this case, it would be 75% of the members of the homeowners association, which is at least 75% of the owners of the houses. And in talking with other advocates, we wanted to add in, not only could it be a vote, but it could also be a petition, because a vote would be all at one time. A petition could be going around to each individual home and seeing if the individuals wanted to sign on to it. So it would be either a vote or a petition. The petition is not in these official amendments, but we will make sure it gets added in before next week. And then, let me see here. And then after that, there will be a time that could either be altered between an agreement, but not more than 105 days after the date of the agreement, for the residents to obtain financing and close on the purchase. And then if they can't agree on the purchase, then the owner will have been deemed to have complied with the owner's obligations under the section, and there will be nothing further. But if the residents decide to submit that purchase order, then they have 105 days, not more than that, to get the financing and to get the closure on and purchase the property. So that is all the amendments that we have.
Great. Thank you very much for going through those. Certainly, if anyone has any questions before next week, we're not going to, as I mentioned, vote on this today, but Delegate Foley has a question now. Take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, so my question is, so this group of renters, I guess that's what they are, right? Renters of these.
They're both homeowners and renters, because
well, they own the homes, right? But they're renting the land, right?
Yeah.
So does this have to be a formal homeowners association, or can it be just, oh, you know, there's a sale coming up, we're forming a group, and you know, we want to go forward
The latter.
with a kind of an ad hoc, the latter. Okay. So and then because it does sound like it has to be, it talks about a homeowners association,
Right.
which I think, and maybe Delegate Holmes can correct me if I'm wrong, but, or maybe you can, Delegate, Mr. Chair, but it seems to me that that's like a legal term of art in terms of, you know, what we think of. Homeowners association has a real legal context in our housing law. So that to me is a little, I thought this bill was, you know, aimed at the sort of that ad hoc kind of, you know, coalition building. And I just wanted to make sure that that's in fact where this was going.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And certainly I think you're right with the intent that basically we want the ability of the residents to, on a more ad hoc basis, basically vote to form a committee and then put in a, you know, a petition or an offer in real time. We're not requiring them to sort of go through any more formal legal hoops, you know, years prior in order to put in an offer. But I saw that our counsel, Matt, unmuted, and so he may have some more insight into the definition of a homeowners organization.
Yes, so one thing just to point out, the bill as drafted and introduced uses the term homeowners organization to mean an incorporated or unincorporated organization, including if this were redeveloped as a cooperative housing organization. So I think maybe saying homeowners association may be inaccurate. Of course, a homeowners association could be formed, but I see in the amendment the use of homeowners association. Maybe that was added, maybe that was amended in. It's possible that the fix here is just to refer to homeowners organization and modify the amendment. So the term itself is defined in the bill, and so it's given new meaning with regard to this subtitle, or it might be a new title. Yes, this new subtitle.
Okay, that makes sense to me. Camille, does that make sense to you? We can clean up that language and make it clear, Delegate Foley.
Yes, it makes sense. It's not the intention to have an HOA. It's
Right.
Okay, great.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, that's a great point, Delegate Foley. Thank you for that. Okay, do we have any more questions or concerns about this bill before we move on to our last bill of the day? Delegate Naraki.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just had one question, just kind of reading through the bill. I'm trying to understand the language about 105 days to acquire financing and then 45 days after that to close. 5 months to me seems like a long time to potentially close on a piece of property. So I'm just trying to understand the thought process around that time, those timeframes there.
Yeah, I mean, we're trying to be reasonable about what the normal sort of time period here looks like. We are extending the amount of sort of notice and the time period for the organization, the homeowners to have, so that they have time to put forth an offer, but without being, we're trying to sort of create a happy medium here where we're not so prescriptive, where we're adding a bunch of cost and complexity onto the homeowners or the community owners themselves. Camille, do you want to take a shot to it at that about our attempts to sort of strike that balance?
Brian, do you have thoughts on the 105 days?
Well, yeah, I mean, and it's a great question, Delegate Naraki, and but for the for lack of a better word, the structure that we put in place here, we would very much oppose this timeline. It's very long. I mean, in the commercial world, usually see 75 days from contract to close. Okay. In this case, though, remember, you're dealing with an owner, a buyer who can't commit to keeping the community as a community and can't commit to not jacking up rents. At that point, the residents should be given every opportunity they can to protect. All right, this is consumer protection, right? To protect their homes, their current living dynamic. So quite honestly, I'm not against, even as a landowner, giving them this amount of time to get their ducks in a row to hopefully be able to take their property down. You know, because at this point, we know that we're dealing with potentially what we'll call a bad actor, somebody looking to redevelop the property or something that, you know. So the way I kind of looked at it, quite frankly, is the ROFO stuff. I'm happy, you know, the residents should have all the time in the world, or should be given total opportunity to buy their park if somebody bad is going to come in, right? And that was the whole idea, was that we're creating a gating threshold. Can you agree to keep rents reasonable as a cap? It's like usury laws. We don't say what the usury rate is. We put a cap on what usury is, and anything after that is usurious, right? So this is a cap, and 5 years is also a substantial length of time. If somebody can't come in and agree to do that, then you're probably dealing with somebody who's going to not treat the residents correctly. At which point, let's give the residents every opportunity to protect themselves. So if it takes, you know, 150 days because the person can't agree to not jack up rent and not keep the community as a community, well, so be it.
Thanks, Ryan. I appreciate that. Delegate Naraki, does that satisfy you, or do you have a follow-up?
No, Mr. Chair, I appreciate that point of clarification there. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a great question. So I neglected just one more technical amendment that we'll make sure that you'll have before next week. One, it kind of some technical stuff, moving sections around, and then this relates to DHCD's concern. We basically had a situation where they were going to have to be required to do some work, and that people were going to have to notify DHCD when one of these properties was going up for sale, and DHCD had some concerns about this. So this is meant to basically try to minimize the burden on the agency, but we'll make sure y'all get that as well. It's not as substantive or as detailed as the first set of amendments, but we wanted to make sure that y'all have an opportunity to review that before we take a vote. Okay, with that, do we have any further questions or comments on this bill, House Bill 23? Seeing none, we'll move on to our final bill of the day, also by yours truly, HB 60. I promise we'll eventually have a subcommittee meeting where a majority of the bills are not from myself. But this bill, if y'all recall, is this Housing Innovation Fund idea. There's no money attached to it, but it creates a new fund that on a pilot basis that would provide matching dollars to counties or cities, public housing authorities that are doing especially innovative things in the area of housing finance. Now, the sort of number one example of this is not that I'm biased, but just objectively, the top example of this is the Housing Opportunities Commission in Montgomery County. Whereas if y'all recall from the hearing, they've been able to do some really dramatic things, taking a relatively small amount of county money and turning it into an incredible amount of new affordable housing. And as I'm sure we all can appreciate, we have a housing shortage in this state and in this country. Now, I don't think that necessarily public housing authorities should or can be the entire solution to this problem, but in Montgomery County, at least, it looks like they're on the pace to cut a pretty decent chunk of that supply, working with nonprofit developers, working with for-profit developers. And so we're basically just trying to reward counties that have already done this, but also possibly more importantly, induce other counties to be more proactive as well. And so that's what this pot of money would be for. The idea would be that we would pass this unfunded fund, if the subcommittee wants to, And then we would have to find the money on the back end, either with the budget committees or with the gubernatorial administration. But all I wanted to do today, other than just sort of field questions, there are a couple of technical amendments that we can run through, nothing super substantive, but I wanted to give an opportunity of someone from HOC to just sort of, I know we have committee to go to. I don't want to go on for too long, and I don't want to keep you guys if you want to grab a bite to eat before we go to the committee hearing at 1. But I wanted to give an opportunity to a representative or two from HOC just to sort of give another broad overview for the benefit of the committee about what they're doing in Montgomery County, why it's working, and how they would benefit from the funding. But first, Delegate Lehman, do you have a question?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I have kind of a dumb question. I was just curious about what makes this a pilot program? Are you sunsetting it after a few years? Why are you calling it a pilot?
It's a good question. I think that the idea was that it was going to be limited, and I can't remember. Matt, do you know if there's a time horizon on it?
I believe there may be. I'd have to do a quick run through the bill just to verify.
Yes, there we go. It is time limited to 5 years. That's what it is. Yeah. So that's why it's a pilot program. It phases out after 5 years. Now, obviously, we're hoping that this would be so tremendously successful, and we would all, as a subcommittee, tour the state with all the new projects we create on a victory lap, that after 5 years, we could reauthorize it. But that's why it's called a pilot project.
Absolutely. Thank you. I think it's a great bill. Thank you for the explanation.
Thank you. And then I will just go now to HOC. I know Ms. Andrews, Mr. Marks, and Mr. Silverman are all joining us from HOC in whatever order or however y'all want to do it. I just wanted to give the subcommittee an opportunity to hear just one more time, maybe with a little bit more detail, what y'all are up to and why this bill would be crucial to y'all's success.
Thank you, Delegate Stewart, and thank you for advancing this particular legislation. It's something that we, of course, are extremely excited about and hopeful for, and look forward to sharing with you the details of how we've been able to leverage our county funds. I'm Chelsea Andrews, the Executive Director of HLC. I'm joined with the Chief Development Officer, Zachary Marks, as well as my Director of Government Affairs, Ken Silverman. I'm going to turn it over to Zach to provide a high-level overview of how we've been able to leverage this resource, but want to indicate that it has been, without a doubt, the biggest tool in our toolbox. And we're really excited about not only the work that we're doing, but also the ability to set a national standard of best practices. We're getting a lot of positive attention as a county and as a state. So turn it over to you, Zach, to provide very quick details on how we've been able to maximize this resource.
Thank you. For the record, Zachary Marks, Chief Real Estate Officer for HOC. So the Montgomery County Council, had seen the long success of HOC's mixed income model, but in particular, in its strong desire to meet its housing goals as set forth by the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments. The council knew that we needed to do something that was a net addition to what everybody was already doing. So that includes everything the private sector is doing, both on the for-profit side and including, sort of the typical affordable housing production, which is primarily the low-income housing tax credit. And those sources are really being fully utilized. And so the Housing Production Fund is the name of the fund that the county and HOC worked together to create. And the idea was actually to create a tool that could produce additional housing without private equity and without using the limited and dear resources for affordable housing, like the low-income housing tax credit and volume cap, which to meet the shortfall in housing production, we needed to create a program that was simple, that was fast, because we need to ramp the production quickly in order to both catch up and continue to maintain the levels we need. And we needed something that was scalable. And so the council looked at HOC's record of producing new mixed income housing and said, and created this production fund tool. And some of the key benefits of this tool are that, one, it is a very simple method of finance. It simply is the county setting aside principal and interest payments for 20 years and in this case, HOC issued the bonds. because we also happen to be the housing finance agency. That's not necessarily a requirement, but through that bond financing approach, the county was able, for the first 50 million of this revolving construction equity fund, was able to do that for $3 million a year on a gross basis, to support a $50 million revolving construction equity fund. And so this construction equity stands in for what would usually be much more expensive private equity. And with that private equity also comes private control. And so the other really important benefit of this fund is that because that private equity is not needed, it is HOC that is in control of the housing, is HOC that is majority or total owner of the housing. And thus we can deploy services, we can manage rent increases. The HOC as a policy on all of its units, whether restricted or unrestricted, participates in the county's voluntary rent guidelines. So that restricts annual renewal rents, as an example. So there are all the things that HOC is also a provider of, we can bring to these properties because we are in the driver's seat. But it's that bond financing that really helps to create a fund that seems like a large number from much less of a commitment from the county level. And then in our case, the projects themselves actually pay a 5% interest rate. Currently, that interest is paid back to the county and is actually a net against that gross $3 million. And so on 50 million, that is a $2.5 million annual interest payment. And so you get a net cost of about $500,000 a year in order to produce a $50 million fund. And I'll just pause after saying that each 50 million is creating about 750 additional units, and is worth about 5 to 10% of the county's annual housing goals. I'll pause there. If there are any questions, I'm happy to go into anything further as well.
Thank you, Mr. Marks. Well, first of all, before I recognize Delegate Holmes, do you have any sort of PowerPoint presentations or any sort of documents that you could provide to the subcommittee prior to our meeting next week, just so those of us that are sort of more written or visual learners, that we could sort of pour over this?
Absolutely. We've
Okay.
presented several times to the council.
I know you have. Yeah. Well, and we can distribute that across the committee so that everyone can wrap their head around this and have another week to do so. My other question that you covered, which is that one thing I've heard some apprehension about, is this idea that, well, what if we give all this money to the public housing agency, but then they partner with a private entity that essentially serves as the landlord, and then they've benefited from all this public money, but then they've jacked the rents up. But you already addressed how, you guys comply with all these properties with sort of the rent stabilization guidelines in the county. My last question before we go to Delegate Holmes is I think that generally, when the average sort of American or the average Marylander, including in the General Assembly, hears the idea of public housing, the construction of new public housing, which is not something that this country has done a lot of since the middle part of the 20th century, there's some natural apprehension there. There's this idea that, didn't this not work before? Could you address sort of that point specifically and talk about how you all partner with both nonprofit and for-profit groups and try to, assuage some of that, some of those fears?
Yes, absolutely. And so just to start, capital P, capital H, public housing is just, frankly, it's a specific program. It's a different program. It's a federal program. HOC's mixed income model, we've been producing these kinds of communities for decades. And so what's nice is you can go see them and see what they look like and how they feel like, how residents respond to living in them. And so you don't have to, we don't have to have the conversation hypothetically. We're opening the first of these to be funded with the Housing Production Fund next month. We would certainly be happy to tour anybody. It's a beautiful property. It's transit oriented, and I would say the biggest difference between the programs, and there are many, but the biggest difference is just frankly that these mixed income properties serve people across the income spectrum, and so they are designed to be inclusive and to be diverse.
I appreciate that. And we do love field trips on this committee, so we'll have to talk to our boss, Chairman Kumar Barve. But I personally would love to have a tour with all the members of the subcommittee and the committee. Delegate Holmes.
Thank you, Delegate Stewart, Mr. Chair. based upon the success story of Mr. Marks, and I really appreciate Mr. Marks, you taking the time to explain this to us. I was wondering, Delegate Stewart, why you're taking the interest from this program and putting it back to the general fund, as opposed to taking it back and putting it into the fund, which sounds like what Mr. Marks is doing. But it looks like in the bill, I think it's on page 2, line 15 and 16, it looks like you're taking the interest and put it back to the general fund as opposed to back into the program, unless I misunderstand it.
Yeah, I think our goal was to create a revolving fund like they do on a county level. And Mr. Marks, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's one of the amendments that y'all have sent over to us that we're going to change. Is that right?
Yeah, so there's two, and this is definitely another.
We're moving to the
reason.
amendment conversation. So yeah, feast your eyes on the other side of your screen now.
Yes. Yeah. So definitely another reason why it's helpful to have like the PowerPoints and so forth. But there are basically two different pieces at work here. So first, there's the principal loan, right? So you create the fund loans, $10 million to a project. After it's constructed, built, leased up and stabilized, that money, get that 10 million. So the principal comes back to the fund to be loaned out to the next deal. So that's one thing that happens. And we like that because that means the fund can revolve and actually will revolve forever, even after the 20-year bond is paid off. And that's another nice feature. Then there's the project interest, which is the actual cost that the projects pay. And in our case, the reason why we structured it that way was because this fund, frankly, was born during the pandemic. And so we wanted to create the most cost-efficient fund we possibly could. But there were discussions as recently as yesterday in front of a subcommittee or committee of the Montgomery County Council about precisely your ideas of instead of paying that money back to the general fund to offset, couldn't we reinvest that money for that interest payment toward creating deeper affordability, doing more projects? So those are terrific ideas and certainly ones that are on the table.
Thank you, Delegate Holmes. Astute as always. These are some relatively technical amendments that HOC has sent us that I'll make sure y'all all have access to before next week. Mr. Marks, do you want to just briefly explain why we're doing these tweaks here?
Ken, did you want to take this one?
Sure. So the First Amendment is really just to clarify that an authority, a public housing authority, would be directly eligible to apply to the fund for matching funds, in addition to a county government. The way it was written, it was a little unclear, and so we just wanted to clear that up. And then the other amendment, sort of at the end of Amendment 2, where you substitute the and for an or, just clarifies that the minimum affordability that would be required for any project would be either 20% at 50% AMI or below, or 40% at 60% AMI or below, which is consistent with the requirements for tax credits and other commonly used funding vehicles. So, as we have dealt with our housing production fund, that affordability really just serves as an absolute floor, and our commission, and I'm sure other bodies around the state, would always seek to increase that wherever possible, layer in vouchers and other tools to reach lower levels of affordability. But those are the two amendments before you.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for coming. If possible, we'd like to have you back next week in case there are any other questions once people have had time to digest the amendments, and I'll also digest any sort of paper we can send over to them about your program. But we really thank you all for your time. Subcommittee members, I'm going to go ahead and wrap us up there so that everyone has ample time to get over to the committee hearing room. Let me know if you have any questions about any of this stuff. We'll try to get all the documents to you that I promised. But again, thank you all for your time. I think it was a good kickoff introductory meeting. We'll take some votes next week for the first time, and I will see you all in the hearing room.